Go ahead and have a seat. Hey, good morning. Good to be with you. Before we get into all that, a couple of quick announcements. Hey, if you didn't hear via email this week, we announced that we are returning to campus on September 7th. Very excited about that. School announced that they are returning to campus for this coming fall, and we are going with them. So September 7th, that is the Sunday after Labor Day, we'll be back on campus. We'll be in the gym, which some of you who have been here a while remember that the church was in the gym for a long time while the sanctuary was being built the first time. We will be in there probably for 2 or 3 years while the sanctuary is being rebuilt. So very exciting, a lot of work to do before we get there, and then a lot of work to do when we get there. But it is exciting to be able to think about what ministry looks like being back in the Palisades. So I hope and pray that many of you will be able to join us there, not only on Sundays, but that your lives will take you back to the Palisades as well, to take up residence there once again, and we can get back to some semblance of normal. So very excited about that. I've walked the campus a number of times and given people tours. My family's in town, and so I was touring. They asked questions, and there's a lot of questions that I go, you know what? I have no idea. I was there 1 week, and then it all burned down. And so I could tell you a lot more about Bel Air than I could tell you about the Palisades at this point, but I'm looking forward to that being different. So we are continuing in our series in Romans, and we're getting to the spicy parts. And so I'm excited about that. I think these are very important ideas, very important topics for us to be talking about. But what I want to do first is take a little step backwards, because we need to understand Paul's argument for why he's getting to where he's getting today. This is, not exactly one long sentence, but close. Paul is the king of run-on sentences. And so this is one long argument that Paul's going to make starting in Romans 1:1 all the way through Romans 16. It is really one big argument. So I want us to take a step back so we understand how Paul gets to where we are today. So if you remember, in verse 16, we talked about, after Paul kind of got through all of his introductions, that he gives us his thesis statement, the lens through which we're going to see the rest of the book. And he says in verse 16, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith," which is just a little play on words to say it's all about faith. The righteousness of God is revealed by faith for faith. It's all about our faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Okay, so Paul starts by saying the righteousness of God is being revealed in the gospel, and then very quickly in verse 18 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against ungodliness and unrighteousness." So first, God reveals his grace and his righteousness through the gospel, and then he's also revealing his wrath on mankind against ungodliness and unrighteousness. And then verse 22 and 23 kind of talks about why God's wrath was activated, right? So we talked about this last week. It says, "For although they knew God," starting in verse 21, "for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened." Why? Because claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. So we talked last week about how the core of sin, this idea of idolatry that Paul is going to talk about over and over and over throughout Romans, and that we might already be sick of, is at its heart the idea of substitution, right? They are making an exchange. Instead of worshiping God as God and therefore obeying and following and loving and all of those things to God, they exchanged God for created things. Instead of worshiping the Creator, they worshiped the created things. And it says they exchanged them for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles, right? So they, in a very literal sense, exchanged worship of God for physical idols, actual things that were in the shape of humans and animals and et cetera, et cetera. We talked about how we don't exactly do that this week. We've got our kind of own versions of that, how we exchange our worship of God for worship of other things. Okay, so that's all the context that leads up to Paul in verse 24 says, therefore, and again, in your personal Bible study, always read it therefore and go, okay, it's a connector, right? My youth pastor always used to say, therefore is there for a reason. Genius, right? What it means is, I just said something, and so, or that means this, right? So we always have to understand how this is working together. This is not just a random list of ideas that Paul's thrown out. He's making an argument, okay? So all of this exchange happened. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. Okay, here is my contention for the rest of this passage. That idea, therefore God gave them up, is actually kind of the model for this whole idea of how God is revealing his wrath. Okay, so let me finish 24 and 25. It says, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged, they substituted. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So, again, Paul says the wrath of God is revealed. Question is how? He says, therefore, God gave them up to the lust of their hearts. The word for lust in the Greek is epithemia. Okay? We'll say it together on three. 1, 2, 3. Epithemia. Now you know Greek. Okay? And epithemia simply means like an over-desire. Like you love something, you desire something, and then there's a way you can over-desire something, right? There's lots of good things in our lives that when we over-desire them, we turn them into bad things in our lives, right? That could be sports, that could be food, that could be a person, that could be a million things, that there is a very healthy and good kind of love to have for that thing, and then there is an over-desire for that thing as well, right? Even a spouse can become an over-desired thing. Now, most of us would argue probably a little under-desire, but sometimes we get an over-desire for that thing, and then it kind of starts to distort that thing. That's epithemia. That's what Paul is saying God does. God gives them up to the epithemia, that over-desire in our hearts. C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce, you're going to get a lot of great divorce today, says this. He says, no natural feelings are high or low, holy or unholy in themselves. They are all holy when God's hand is on the rein. They all go bad when they set up on their own and make themselves into false gods. Okay? So hear Paul's argument here. He says, the wrath of God is revealed because of idolatry, because of this exchange. God's wrath is revealed. How? God's wrath is revealed in giving us what we want. That's the wrath of God. The wrath of God the present wrath of God is revealed as him letting us live out the fullest expression of our desires. One commentator, a French guy named Frédéric Godet, just wanted to say his name, said he positively withdrew his hand. Meaning, this wasn't a passive act of God. This was an active move of God to withdraw his hand. It says he positively withdrew his hand. He ceased to hold the boat as it was dragged by the current of the river. So you can kind of picture that, right? You got a toy boat, you're on the side of the river, you're holding it in place actively, and then you make a conscious decision to go, okay, go with the river if that's what you want, right? And then it just goes down the river. It follows the flow of the current. That is what Paul is describing here. These are the same issues that he described in verses 18 through 23, this idolatry and this substitution. And God goes, okay, you want to trade me out? You want to exchange me for your career. You want to trade me out for your spouse, a possible future spouse, some sexual conquest, your bank account, cultural power, some in-group identity. Cool. Go for it. Let's see how that works out for you. That's the wrath of God. The wrath of God, Paul describes here, this, and certainly, let me just asterisk here. There is a different kind of like active wrath of God that we see play out through the scriptures. That's absolutely true, and I'm not trying to deny that that's a part of it. But what Paul's describing here as the wrath of God is God simply looking at you going, you want this person over me? Fine, have them. You want this job more than you want me? Great, go for it. You want to pursue this identity more than listen to me and follow who I've made you to be? Okay. Let's just see how that goes. Wrath. That's the wrath of God. No safety net, no bumpers, just us and our idols trying to save us, trying to satisfy us, trying to give us meaning, direction, ethics, purpose. That's it. That's wrath. God going, I won't direct you anymore. A lot of you guys are parents. You know this moment with your kids where they go, I want this, I want to do this, I want to do this. You go, no, it's not good for you, it's not good for you. It's going to kill you, it's going to hurt you, it's going to lead you down the wrong path, and eventually you just go, all right, go for it. See what happens. Jump off the couch. See how it goes. And then they jump, they fall, they hurt themselves, and you go, good. You got to learn somehow, right? You got it. Sometimes good parenting is going like, yeah, try it, see how it goes. I know it's not going to go good. I know this is going to be destructive. I know that you should just listen to me and do what I say and sit on the dang couch. I know that. But hey, if you want to stand in your chair while you eat, let's see how that goes. Oh, you crashed. Shocker. That's wrath. That's God's wrath being poured out. Now, if you've ever read The Great Divorce, well, let me say this. If you've never read C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, go read it. Like, I give you permission to leave right now and go read it. It's a better sermon than I could preach. It is a fantastic book, and it is an allegory about kind of heaven and hell and how people might go about choosing one or the other. And very famously in it, he says, there are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek find, those who knock, it is opened. Lewis's whole argument in this, and it's an amazing book, because over and over and over, he just follows the stories of these individuals who get to the gates of hell and are being people are trying to convince them, like, just come in with me. But it requires them to let go of something, to let go of some relationship, to let go of some identity, to let go of something in their lives, and they get to the gates of heaven, are being invited into it, and nobody can let go. They can't let go of blame. They can't let go of fault. They can't let go of some past wrong. They can't let go of being loved finally by the spouse that was unloving to them. They can't let go of whatever the thing is. Ultimately, they choose, I want this thing more than I want to be in the presence of God. That is what Paul is describing here. That is the wrath of God that is poured out to us when God goes, fine, have it your way. When God ceases to protect us from what he knows is going to kill us, what he knows is going to hurt us, that is an outpouring of the wrath of God to let our idols control us. Okay? So this is the beginning of Paul's argument here. Before we go on, I want us to take a step back and understand kind of what Paul is doing rhetorically here. And Paul is a trained rhetoricalician. He knows what he is doing here, right? Every one of his books is shaped and formed and structured towards argument. He knows what he is doing. So one commentator describes it this way, Scott McKnight says this: the words in Romans 1, 18-32 are a standard Jewish stereotype of the godless, idolatrous Gentiles of the diaspora. Romans 1:18-32 does not describe all humans. There is too much particularity and resonance with other Jewish texts in Paul's descriptions of sinful behaviors and idolatries for this to be just about common human sinfulness. Not all Gentiles live out these sins, but this is the stereotype of the Jewish prophetic critique and accusation of paganism and its ways. Jews knew this description, they believed this description, they repeated this description. This was the stereotype of the immoral pagan idolater. Now, what does that mean? It means that Paul is kind of borrowing on kind of known tropes that the Jews would have believed about the Gentiles. We talked about this in the first couple of weeks of this series, that the church in Rome was this kind of weird multicultural church, not weird because it was multicultural, but weird in the sense of how it became multicultural. So when the gospel first came to Rome, it was on the heels of the emperor of Rome driving out all of the Jews because they were troublemakers. He didn't want what they were doing in Rome, and so he drives out all the Jews. So the beginning of the church in Rome was primarily Gentile. And then over time, those Jews started to filter back into Rome, and so you started to have this multicultural church where the church had started as a very Gentile cultured church, and then the Jews start to come in, and the Jews, as you see in a lot of these other, especially Galatians and Ephesians, you see Paul having to wrestle with the Jews around how do they disentangle their Jewish customs and their Christian faith. This was a constant battle for them where they were coming from Judaism into Christianity, where the Gentiles were coming from paganism into Christianity. And so you can imagine kind of the cultural conflict that was experienced in that. So as Paul writes to this very multicultural church, he borrows on what would have been very common Jewish understandings of pagan behavior. And that's the description that he gives us in those first couple of verses. And those Jews used those stereotypes in the way that all stereotypes are used, which is to denigrate a group of people. So Paul starts to use this language that they would have gone like, yeah, you go get them, Paul. You go get those dirty pagans. That's how they are. Right? So it's super important for us to understand because it allows us to see the rest of this passage the way Paul intended. So let's read verse 26 and 27. For this reason, God gave them up, that same language, God gave them up to dishonorable epithemia. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men, receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. Now, this is why I spent so much time talking about what Paul is doing rhetorically here, because otherwise this passage becomes kind of the point of the whole thing, and we can get tripped up on it. So I need to say two things at once here. This passage, 26 and 27, are not the center of Paul's argument. This isn't the point of Paul's argument to call out the fact that homosexuality is sin, has always been sin from a Christian perspective and Jewish perspective, and continues to be. That's not the point. So, for us, we have two things we have to do at once. Go, hey, let's not on the one hand make this the point of Paul's argument, because it's not the point of Paul's argument, and on the other hand, not go, well, it's not really the point of Paul's argument, so let's not deal with it, or let's not believe it, or whatever. No. It's an implication. It's an example of a way when God has given people over that their behavior can go. So it's an illustration or example of a true thing, a true principle, but it is not the principle itself. There is something much deeper here, and we're going to see that. We have to follow Paul's logic. In verse 25, he says, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator who is blessed forever. So that's what happened, this exchange. They're going to choose to worship the creature, the created thing, instead of the creator. The people that he's referring to, not all Gentiles, but certainly some. He's not trying to make a blanket statement about all Gentiles do this, but it's just a generalization of this kind of person. He says, they have exchanged God for the created world. Paul is specifically calling out the ways in which people have deified their bodies. That's the exchange they're making. They have exchanged God for their own body. He says they worship and serve their bodies. So what happens when we make an idol out of our bodies? Paul says that we give way to dishonorable passions. In other words, when we exchange God for our bodies become God. And as such, they become our highest authority. So whatever our bodies tell us is true. Whatever we feel is right. We have given our bodies authority over us. So then, the desires and passions that Paul refers to rule over the mind, the will, the agency of the person. So we end up saying things like, I didn't choose this. It's just the way I am, or it feels right. Those are ways to say, my body has authority over my identity. My body has authority over my choices. My body has authority over my ethics and the way that I see the world. My body is the ultimate authority. It's been exchanged. Instead of God being the ultimate authority, our bodies have become our ultimate authority. Our passions and desires, our feelings rule us. They define us because we have given them the authority to do so. Whenever you make something an idol, you give it the authority to define reality, to give identity, to direct our moral choices. So Paul says that when we do that to our bodies, it leads us, ironically, to dishonor them. When the body decides what it is, uncontrolled by the mind, the will, the spirit, it will certainly lead a person astray because it cares only for its own satisfaction. This is what Paul's describing. We catch that? We have to follow the logic rather than just going like, oh, Bible says homosexuality is a sin, so that's what I believe, and we just go. Yes, but follow the logic. Follow Paul's argument, because a lot of times what happens, and I see this especially in a place like LA, where we're surrounded by people, and probably presently here today, people who would disagree with that conclusion. And that's okay. Glad you're here, very glad you're here. But at least track with the logic, okay? The logic isn't, this is bad because God says it's bad. Yes, but why? Because what's happening at the most fundamental level is that we're making an exchange. You're making an exchange. I make exchanges all the time. He is describing one particular exchange, which is to say, no longer is God sovereign, but my body is sovereign. Therefore, what my body says is true. What my body dictates for me, unencumbered by any other outside force, unencumbered by biblical ethics, unencumbered by society, unencumbered by relationships, unencumbered by anything. This is who I am, and therefore what I do. That's the exchange. That's an illustration of one way in which that happens. As you will see, there are more. One quick side note on this, which I think is just a really interesting thing that we see in our culture. Culture does this weird thing where it deifies the desires of the body. This is very common, right? That you are whatever your body says that you are, and that's not only about sexuality, but it's now about gender identity and all these things. Like, whatever your body says you are is what you are. So we deify the desires of the body, but culture does this weird thing where, because it knows that making something important also makes it precious, and if it's precious, then it has to be cared for, and it has to be cultivated, but then that requires responsibility and restriction. You don't let a precious thing be used by whoever and whatever. So we do this weird thing where we deify the body and talk about how precious it is and sexual expression is, but then at the same time denigrate it by rationalizing our casual sexual behavior by saying it's just sex, it's not a big deal. We can't make up our mind. Is sex no big deal, or is it the biggest deal? Is it everything and it defines your identity, or is it not a big deal and you can just go out on a Friday night and it's fine? So is it everything and defines you and is ultimate, or is it no big deal and it can be just thrown around, tossed around, and changed at will? We can't make up our minds. The answer is that in any given moment, it is exactly what we want it to be in order to justify whatever behavior we desire. So that was just a side note. Now, some of you are offended by this, and I get that. And I'm not trying to offend anybody on purpose. I'm not against it, but that's not my point. So let me ask you this. Especially if you're a Christian, and you come up against something like this and you go, I disagree with that. Ask yourself this. If you find that God always agrees with you, and that when there are moments of conflict, you win, I would just ask, like, what is it? You're either an amazing Christian, like completely in line with the will of God, or you might be worshiping yourself. And God is actually just kind of a reflection in the mirror of what you already want and believe and think. So it's just that if God can never disagree with you or never does disagree with you, I'm not sure you're worshiping God. Because you're, like I said, you're either perfect or you've just made God in your own image. So whether you agree with this or not, or follow the logic and you just go, no, I don't like that conclusion, or I don't believe, whatever, okay. But wrestle with it. Wrestle with it. Now, back to the rhetoric here. Because Paul's making an argument, and the argument keeps going. So I want you to picture this. The first time that this letter is read, it's read out loud. And it's read out loud probably by a woman named Phoebe, who we see at the end in Romans 16 is kind of Paul's emissary, right? So she gets up in this room, probably a large house, and reads this letter from beginning to end while everyone's sitting there and listening to Phoebe. So this is the context for how this is going out. So as Paul is reading, or as Phoebe is reading this stuff out loud, there's no doubt. Now, I just imagine, I don't got a verse for this, but I just imagine, given the cultural kind of strife and ethnic strife happening in this church, I got to imagine like the Gentiles are over here, the Jews are over here, they're kind of side-eyeing each other the whole time, and they're not this like integrated mix. They're on either side of the room. So Phoebe starts reading this, and starts talking about how they've given themselves up, into the dishonoring of their bodies, and they worship and serve the Creator. For this reason, I gave them up to dishonorable passions. And then verse 28 says, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what not ought to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness and evil and covetousness and malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness, right? And I got to imagine the Jews over here are kind of looking over at the Gentiles like, give it to them, Phoebe, give it to them. Like, you got it. That's exactly what's happening. And then she keeps reading. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, the worst one of all, disobedient to parents. It's in the Bible, kids. Disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. For though they knew God's decree. See, this list starts with Phoebe looking directly at the Gentiles, right? They're filled with unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. And then I imagine Phoebe's gaze starts to turn towards the Jews as she says, they are gossips and slanderers and haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless, for they knew God's decree. Who knows God's decree? The Jews. So the Jews are nodding along while she's reading off all this stuff that they hate about the Gentiles. And then at some point, they've got to slowly, if you had a video camera, you'd know who's catching on the quickest, right? Because they're all of a sudden like this. They're like, oh no. Like as the focus turns to them and she goes, even though they knew God's righteous decree, that those who practice these things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. Paul, in this short 18 to 32 has moved from what theologians would call general revelation, right? So in 18 it says, in verse 19, for what they know about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them, for his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been made known in the creation ever since the creation of the world. He starts with this big natural revelation and then ends with God's law, which the Jews would know. So he starts with this big Gentile critique and pagans and all this, and ends by going, and you all know better. In fact, you're doing the same thing. Yeah, sure, it's not this kind of dishonoring of your bodies thing, because of course you Jews are too good for that. All you do is malice and slander. You're heartless, you're ruthless. You're racist. I mean, we're going to get into that as this book goes on. There were some massive ethnic and cultural things going on here that were a real problem. Paul in Galatians chapter 4 gives us another little piece of this, a little taste of it. He says, formerly, writing to the church in Galatia, which was almost completely a Jewish convert church, he says, formerly, when you did not know God, not as Christians, as Jews who have been converted to Christianity, he says, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not gods. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I'm afraid I must have labored over you in vain. Paul goes, you're going back to the Jewish law? Why? Why would you do that? You have been freed from that slavery of the law. Why would you go back to those worthless idols? Paul's critique for the Gentiles is real, and we've got to feel it, and we can't just go, oh, I see, he was setting up the Jews. Yes, he was setting up the Jews by telling the truth about the Gentiles. So we can't make this passage, well, it's all about this pagan, homosexuality and all this stuff. Yeah, and he goes, the real problem here is the exchange. And there's a million ways you can exchange. There's a million things you can trade God out for. And we could go around the room and list hundreds that we do every day. It may not be one, it's the other. And we go, well, that one's the bad one. And this one, I get I shouldn't do that, but that one's the bad one. Paul goes, I don't know. Those who practice these things deserve to die. So which of them are you dying harder? Are you dying more? It's all the same. Exchange is exchange. There are implications for the things we exchange and what they do to us when we put our career as God, or when we put our family as God, or we put whatever other thing, some identity as God, or some person, some relationship as God. It goes bad in its own unique ways than when we put our bodies as God, sure. But it's no less an exchange. It's no less substitution. It's no less idolatry. That's Paul's point. And if they haven't realized that Paul set them up by now, a little teaser of next week, in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, therefore you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges. For in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourselves, because you, the judge, practice these very same things. So the issue at the heart of all of our sin is this exchange of going, nope, God is not in charge. God is not ultimate. Therefore, God does not define reality. God does not define my identity. God does not define my ethics. God does not define my priorities. Whatever I have exchanged him for, that defines my identity. It defines my priorities, my values, my ethics, and my identity. That thing. And whatever that thing is not God, and so it will ultimately destroy you. It will. This is the epithumia, that over-desire. Everybody could tell a story of a parent who over-desired the good of their children. We have seen that. We have terms for them. We call them helicopter parents. We call them bad parents. I don't know. We've got lots of phrases we use. We call them the worst kids in children's ministry. Whatever we call them in my house. We know how that goes. We know about the people who epithumia their spouse. and in the process either strangle them with expectations or distance themselves in hopes that they will be pursued by. There's a bunch of different ways that can cause dysfunction in relationships. It's all an over-desire for a thing because we have put it in the position only God can handle. Nothing else can handle the burden of being God. It's too much. It's too much. It will ultimately crash and destroy us. That's Paul's argument. So what do we do with this? Let's go back to verse 16. Our thesis for this whole book. Paul says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes." All that God needs from us is that we trust him, that we believe him. And I want to make this one little tweak in language here that might separate the way we've thought about faith from what I think Paul is teaching us here. And to say it's not enough for us to just believe in God. It's not. It's not enough for us to just believe in God. And that may seem like, man, am I adding law or am I adding things we got to do? No, that's actually not what the Bible ever asks us to do, to simply believe in God, that believe that God exists. In fact, in James chapter 2, verse 19, James goes, "You believe in God? Great, so do demons. And they shudder." It's not enough to believe in God. What the ask of the gospel is that we believe God. We believe him. That we take him at his word. That we believe that what he said is true and how he revealed himself is who he is. And that what he says he made us for is in fact what we made him for. Not just that we believe in him, but that we believe him. And we know this in every relationship we have. It's not enough to believe in the existence of your spouse. They actually expect you to believe what they say. Right? That's trust. It's not trust to simply believe that something exists. It's trust to believe that that person is who they say they are and will do what they say they will do, and that the promises they give, they will make good on. That's the ask of the gospel. And so God simply goes, just believe me. Believe me. That's it. Trust me. Believe me. You're going to screw it up. It's okay. I took care of that too. Believe that. Believe that I took care of that part as well. Trust that I had a plan when I made the world. That I had a plan when I made you. Trust that evil is real and it's inside you. Believe me that I made a way for us to be in relationship, for you to be saved from sin. Believe me that I have a future not only for you individually, but for all of it. I've got a future. It's going to happen. Believe me. That's it. Just believe me. I took care of the rest. Just believe me. Back in verse 16, Paul says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed." Right? We talked about how God has revealed who he is in the gospel. He has revealed his righteousness and he has revealed his wrath. How? God has revealed himself in the gospel by giving over the same way talked about the wrath of God in our lives as him giving us over to our own sin. The way in which we have potential for eternal life is that God gave over Jesus to death. He gave him over to the consequences of his wrath. And Jesus willingly and lovingly and purposefully and miraculously was given over to death so that we might have life. That is the righteousness of God being revealed. And all we have to do is believe him. Believe that what he said is true. Believe that Jesus' perfect life revealed his righteousness. That his perfect death sealed the fact that we can experience that righteousness. That's it. Just believe he is who he says he is and he did what he said he did. And the rest of it's going to be taken care of so that every day we can try and go, I'm going to believe you. I'm going to believe you. I believe you. I believe you. Okay, I don't believe you on this. All right, God goes, I got that. Let's start believing in that. But in the meantime, I got you. But you should still believe. But I got you. That's the whole Christian life, is us going, I am not sure I believe. God goes, grace for that, but also believe. Also, let's go. That's it. Paul makes this whole big argument and goes, God has revealed his righteousness to you in the fact that he has made this way for you completely. Just believe me. Just believe me. Let's pray. Jesus, it blows my mind. It is hard to fathom the deep, deep love that you have for us. It exceeds anything else that I have experienced in my real life. It exceeds anything I've ever given in my real life. I think about all of the imperfect ways in which I love my wife and my kids and my family and my friends and this church and you. I love all of them in fits and starts and imperfectly and in failure. And yet, you continue to give us this model for love that also includes an understanding of our failure and a redemption of it. So God, I pray that you would not pour your wrath out on us by giving us what we want. Please don't give us what we want. Lord, give us what we need. And help us to see the difference between those two things. Help us to see, and I think there's an instinct in all of us to go, oh, I don't do that. Yes, my career is important to me. My family is important to me. This group I'm part of, this is important to me. My identity, it's important to me. This thing that I want to do, it's important to me, but it's not God. I mean, I still worship God. Lord, reveal to us where that's not true. Help us to see clearly what it is we actually love, honor, and obey. And then protect us from it. Protect us from it. Pour out your righteousness on us so that we might see clearly the difference between what is good and what is not good, what you've made us for and what is destructive. So thank you that you are a rational God, that we can understand your will, we can understand the arguments for why you say this and that. Look, it all makes sense, and I'm thankful for it, that you've given us the capacity to understand. I pray, Lord, that we would just walk in that we would believe you. In Jesus' name we pray.